Morning, everybody. So yes, I'm Joel Levin. I'm the executive director of Plug-in America, and this is a webinar on our EV driver survey. We're anticipating this to be an annual event. Doing this survey, this is the first one we've done, and we're really excited about it. We're glad that you're here. I know that there have been a number of other surveys of EV drivers' sentiments in the US. This is a little bit different because of kind of who we are in the world. It's focused on the drivers themselves and EV intenders. So that is to say, people who expect to be buying an EV within the next 12 months. So it's not a broader survey of sort of public attitudes about EVs. It's really focused on drivers and intenders. And because of who Plug-in America is, it's really focused on people as consumers. So what has their experience been as a driver? What are their needs? What are their concerns? So to try to highlight as consumers how things are going. So that's really been our focus because of the nature of who we are as an organization. So before I jump in, I wanted to introduce some of the other people on the call today from our team. These are actually the folks who did the real heavy lifting of designing the survey and implementing it, gathering the data, crunching it, and writing the report. So I want to give them a lot of pub for all the work that they did in making this happen. So first of all is Noah Barnes, who you just heard from, who's our communications director. And then also Dr. Peter O'Connor, who is our senior policy manager. And then Eric Ast, who is a consultant. He's the director of East Data and formerly worked at C40 Cities, where he led their data practice for many years, and so has quite a few years of experience with crunching data relating to EVs and electric transportation. And then also Laura Andrews, who is our program manager for events and is the person kind of behind the scenes making everything run smoothly. And so if you have any technical issues, she's the one that you'll be talking to. So let me jump into the presentation here. So first, I'll tell you a little bit about Plug-in America. So we are, hopefully most of you know us pretty well already. We are the National Association of Electric Vehicle Drivers. We're a nonprofit organization. We were founded in 2008. And we do kind of two big things. We advocate for good policies around EVs that help people to get into the vehicles, and we do public outreach and awareness around EVs. So we do a lot of experiential events that allow people to experience the cars directly. So for example, National Drive Electric Week and Drive Electric Earth Day, which is actually coming up in just a few weeks. Plugstar.com, where you can, it's a website where you can try to find the right EV for your lifestyle, and a variety of other programs as well. Our members represent the world's deepest experience in living with and driving the vehicles on a daily basis. So I'll tell you a little bit about the survey in general. It was conducted last fall, and September to October is when we were gathering data. It represents about 3,500 EV owners and 800 EV intenders. So that's people who self-identified as planning to buy an EV within the next 12 months. The data between the two, we asked them a little bit different questions. We had slightly different responses, and I'll identify those when they come up. And we reached out to two different pools of people. So partly the responses were from our mailing list, and partly it was from advertisements that we did on social media. And we actually found that the responses from the two different pools were very similar. So we didn't separate those out at all because we found that they were pretty consistent with each other, which is good, I think. Among the drivers, it represented, as I said, about 3,500 different EVs. This is the breakdown of the cars that people drive. Disproportionately, Tesla is the most, and Chevrolet is second. Nissan is third. Kind of reflects, the actual breakdown of the market in the U.S. of who's driving what. And we had a lot of different really interesting results from the survey. You can, if you want to see it in detail, the survey is online. Probably all of you have a copy of it. These are 4 big takeaway numbers that I wanted to flag, and we'll dive into each of these a little bit more in detail. So first of all, it turns out that EV owners are pretty happy with their cars. 96% of them say that their next car is going to be an EV as well, which is really great. It's very exciting. We were really happy to see that. Second is that in general, people are able to find the information that they need to make their purchase decision. So 85% of them said they could find enough information in order to buy their car, to make a good decision to buy or lease a car. Where they got their information is really interesting, and I'll talk about that a bit more later. So next data point is only 15% of EV owners rated the salesperson as being very knowledgeable, or a very high level of knowledge about EVs, which we felt is pretty low. Generally, when someone is selling you a product, particularly an expensive product, they should have a deep level of expertise in that. So that was something that's kind of low, and definitely needs some focus on. And then the fourth point is that 54% of owners reported experiencing issues with public charging. And those issues varied a lot, and that's what those were is really interesting, and I'll be talking about that in some detail as we go on. So first slide here is about people's motivations for buying an EV. And we found that for both the current owners and the intenders, that environmental protection was by far and away the thing that really drove them, that dwarfed everything else. As we'll see later, they're also concerned about other things, but environmental protection really pushed everything else out of the way. For the current owners, second motivation was that they're fun. So for those of you who are driving an EV now, you know what we're talking about. EVs are fun to drive. And then a little bit behind that was the cost savings, energy independence, and liking the technology. For the intenders, it was a little bit different, that cost savings actually ranked higher than that, with those other things a bit behind them. So that was kind of interesting. And then kind of tied to that, we asked people how much of a concern it was that they be charging with green power. And again, very strong response on that. People really are looking for renewable energy. We did not ask how much, if they're willing to pay extra for that, or how much extra, and that's an interesting question. Maybe that's something we'll look at next year. But we know in general, all things being equal, drivers seem to have a very strong preference for charging with green power when they can. So next I want to talk about incentives. So we asked people about which incentives in the world are important to them. And federal EV tax credit came out on top, which is definitely consistent with other things that we've seen. We know that for the two automakers that used up their tax credits, so Tesla and GM, when they did, they definitely sales took a hit when the tax credit went away. So we know that credit is really important. And then second, interestingly enough, was the ability to charge at home inexpensively. That was almost as important to people. So what we're seeing is two big drivers are being able to get a good deal on the vehicle and being able to charge it at a reasonable price. So money talks. Money was really important for people, and those two really dwarfed all the other things. State and local incentives came in third. So the cost of the vehicle, turns out, is very important. Not surprisingly, I suppose. And then among the people who said that home charging is really important, it turns out almost all of them live in a single family house. So that's, if you've got home charging, you like it, you use it a lot. For other people, if you're living in an apartment, it turns out you don't have so much access to home charging. I think that's sort of what I can glean from this, and again, that's probably not a big surprise, that particular fact. So next, I want to talk about information sources. So as I mentioned, people mostly are able to find the information that they need to make a good decision. What's interesting is where they get it. So EV-specific websites turned out to be by far and away people's most valuable source of information. So one of them is plugstar.com, that is operated by Plug-in America. But there's a number of others as well in the world. So it turned out that's really people's preferred source of information. Second being news articles. And then after that, for the intenders, it seems that they really value ride and drive events, which we think are really important as well. That's something we do a lot of, where people can actually go out and test drive vehicles and experiencing them directly. So for the owners, automaker websites were the next preferred source. And actually for both, automaker websites turned out to be a very useful source of information. What was interesting also is where people are not getting their information. So generally with most car buyers, people tend to start their car buying journey at kind of general automaker, not automaker websites, general auto websites that allow people to look at a variety of vehicles and compare them. It turned out for EV buyers, those are a pretty low source of information. So those are evidently not really meeting people's needs right now. And then the lowest source of information is advertising. So, and as you know, there is not a great deal of advertising for EVs right now. And so, in fact, that's right down at the bottom for people's sources of useful information. So next I want to talk about charging a bit. So as I mentioned before, people like home charging. So definitely we saw that for people who can charge at home, they do. That most of them charge at home daily or weekly. If you have access to it, that seems very, very common. But workplace charging is also very important. So for people who have access to workplace charging, something like half of them charge either daily or weekly. So something to note for people who manage workplaces, that that's a great perk. People seem to like it. If they've got it, a lot of them do use it. So next, I want to talk about public charging. So 54% of people identified public charging as having some problems with public charging, but what the problems were varied quite a bit and were a little bit different than actually we expected doing this survey. So this is interesting, and I want to spend a little bit of time on it. So for almost half of people, having a broken charger, a charger that was non-functional, was the biggest issue. Second was that it was occupied, or just that it was not available for one reason or another. Third is that it was blocked, generally by an ICE car, sometimes by an EV also. So they couldn't use it because it was being blocked in by someone who wasn't charging. And then problems with the network or the app or payment, some sort of payment problem was the fourth issue. Speed was actually really low. Very few people complained about the chargers weren't fast enough. And cost actually was not something that people flagged very much as well. So let me talk a bit about the broken chargers. So As you might expect, this was more of a problem with non-Tesla chargers. So we were able to break this out a little bit because people told us the model of vehicle that they were driving. There's a little bit of blurriness because some people have 2 cars, and so it was a little unclear with that. But generally, we found that the Tesla superchargers were less of a problem for people, and that's consistent with what we hear anecdotally, that in general Tesla gets pretty high ratings for the reliability of their system, and also because they generally have a lot of redundancy. That when you go to a Tesla Plaza, there's multiple chargers. So, and a number of people noted that if they pulled up and one of the superchargers was broken or it was full, they could just go next door to the next one. For non-Tesla drivers, we had a few people who talked about being stranded, that there was a single port charger, DCFC charger, that wasn't working and they were stranded. And that's a pretty unpleasant experience. I imagine once that happens to you, you remember that for a long time. So that really is something to flag, that particularly for public agencies that are funding charging, to keep in mind that reliability is really, really important, that you want to make sure that the things that you're funding that have a really high uptime, because when things are broken, people remember it. It's a big problem. Availability was the second most prevalent problem, much smaller, only 16%, and it actually lumped in a couple of different things. In some cases, that meant all the chargers were being used. In other cases, it was that there weren't enough chargers around, no chargers near me. So those were all kind of lumped together. So while there's a lot of concern in the world about growing the number of chargers that are available, and certainly that's important, it turned out that broken chargers by far dwarfs that as a real concern for EV drivers. So getting iced was actually an issue that a lot of people flagged as well. So in other words, that you pull up to a charger and there's an internal combustion engine car that is blocking it. And occasionally that there's an EV that's not charging, that's blocking the spot. So better control over that, being able to ticket or tow people that are blocking chargers, turns out is a pretty important problem. So networking problems were also an issue. There was a whole bunch of different ones that kind of got lumped together in this. So sometimes it was that you couldn't initiate the system. Sometimes that you wanted to use a credit card and you couldn't do that. Sometimes there was a credit card reader and it wasn't functional. Sometimes problems with the app or with the RFID card from the network. Or that people just didn't want to join a network, and they thought that was sort of a pain. Sometimes cell phone reception. So if you have an app and you didn't have good reception at the charger, sometimes if a charger is at the bottom of a 10-story building and all that concrete is blocking cell phone receptivity, that can be an issue. So all of those things together were kind of lumped together and created some issues for people. And so we weren't always clear which it was, but it's, some combination of those were a problem. So charging speed wasn't noted very much by people as an issue. And when it was generally a question of expectations, that they were assuming that it would be faster, or that it was advertised as being faster, and that they didn't get what they were paying for. So it seems like with charging speed, managing expectations is a concern. And then one issue, this was only noted by one person, but I thought it was worth flagging, was bears. So we actually had one respondent who had a bear disconnect their charging session, and they were sort of upset about that and wrote in about it. So I thought we should note that. I don't think it's a big problem for most people, not something to worry about too much with bears, but there it is. So moving on. Next topic is the buying experience and the knowledge of the salesperson. So as you can see, there's kind of a mix of experiences But generally, with a very expensive product like a new car, you would assume that the salesperson would have a very high level of knowledge, and generally they didn't. That was relatively uncommon. So that's certainly something to be concerned about, and something that needs some work. Obviously, as you know, most of you know, we have our dealer engagement program that tries to address this. So we know it's a fixable problem, but still definitely a concern. So last, I want to talk a little bit about demographics of the respondents. EVs are still a pretty early adopter product, still less than 1% of the whole auto market in the US, and still a very high income buyer. So in general, a lot of the buyers are $100,000 plus, so pretty high income, and also older as well, which to some extent also reflects the broader car market. But a lot of people in their 50s and 60s, a little bit in their 70s, relatively few people like in their 20s buying EVs, which is consistent with an early adopter market. The intenders seem to be a little bit younger than owners, so hopefully we're going in the right direction. So that is the last slide that I had for you. So I want to open it up first to the other panelists from our team and invite them to add in anything they want, anything I didn't mention or that they wanted to add any additional comments, and then we can go ahead and open it up to questions from the attendees.
I will just mention really quickly that if anybody does have questions, there's a Q&A function on the screen. So you can go to that Q&A function and please add any questions that you have, and we'll be answering those in a minute.
So nobody? Noah, Pete, Eric?
Pretty much covers it. I'm here for questions, but I think you covered everything really well.
Well, okay.
Okay. Well, we do have one question here. Is there a reason why current drivers rate fun to drive higher than intenders? That it was interesting that seemed to be higher among drivers and intenders, and somebody was curious if there's a reason why.
I have two guesses there. One is that they know what the vehicles are like to drive, and the other is that would tend to fit in a early adopter model more. It's kind of a whimsical reason to get one. So the people who bought EVs when they were a lot more expensive might have been motivated by things like that instead of cost savings.
Yeah, I would kind of guess that too. I'm thinking that, the EV driving experience is really fun, and there's benefits to it that you sort of appreciate more over time. Once you've been driving it for a few months, and you kind of get into the swing of it, and you're starting to enjoy it and enjoying driving past gas stations and stuff like that. So it could be that something that you kind of it grows on you over time. That maybe be my guess too.
I have a couple of questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, so another question, do EV consumers have a higher propensity to want to buy a vehicle online versus the traditional dealership experience?
I don't think we got that information. We could try to ask that in the future. Certainly Tesla buyers in some states have to buy online because they don't have dealerships in every state. But for the other ones, I think we should follow up on that in our next survey.
It's interesting because because of COVID, that seems to be the direction the world is going in general. The buying experience for cars seems to be moving online. So whether that's more in line with what EV buyers want, yeah, we didn't ask that. Anecdotally, we know that EV buyers are kind of less satisfied with the dealership experience than other drivers. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case, but we didn't ask that.
Another question, I'm an intender. Do you have to put money into an escrow account to purchase electricity from some of the charge services?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't think so. You guys, or do any of them require that?
They needed credit card information, I think, but I don't remember there being an escrow. That could have been a different network.
Yeah, I think you have to give them a credit card number.
Another question, how to best leverage this survey to better promote EVs?
We've done our press release and we're having this webinar, but I think some of it would be useful for replying to questions that are raised about, I think there's a lot of information that people are not, they rate the environmental protection very low, ignore the fact it's a public benefit. So I think it's good for the policy point of view of answering that, saying, no, our buyers really are concerned with the public benefit here. That does matter. And then the recent study that just came out on mileage, which we had several concerns about the methodology, that UC Davis study. I think in our following survey, we could have a good response to the mileage question also. So there's a lot of ways this can inform our policy work.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one of the really interesting things I think is that, maintenance, reliability of chargers is really, really important. That's something that drivers seem to care about a lot, is that when you pull up to a charger and you're expecting it to work, it better work. And it better not be blocked either because someone else is using it or because there's an ICE car parked in it. So when you're expecting a charger to work, that it works, that turns out to be a really big deal. The other thing is around, dealers. Obviously, there's still a lot of work to be done with, building the skills for salespeople. I think is an important policy issue. So I think that, and there's a few other kind of things in there, but yeah, I think there's some valuable policy stuff in here. We'll probably keep beating that drum.
And I will also add that we did, we released the report for this a couple of weeks ago, and we have gotten some press around it. Some different news outlets have written about this survey. And so I think that also just helps kind of generate kind of some more momentum around electric vehicles in general, so that people who aren't EV drivers are reading about this and reading that, when you hear a stat like 96% of electric vehicle drivers will make their next vehicle also electric, I think that's a pretty compelling statistic to show that people are happy with their electric vehicles. They're not regretting their decision.
Yeah, I can imagine there's probably very few products in the world that can cite 96% for anything.
Another question that we got: do we know how much interest there is in buying a used EV instead of a new EV, and also a BEV versus a PHEV?
Yeah, I think it was about 3/4 BEV and 1/4 PHEV in our respondents. It was off the top of my head. I could dig into the data, but it was around that level. And in terms of used versus new, I don't think we asked that. That'd be a good one for the future.
We didn't ask every possible question in the world because we tried to be really disciplined about the number of questions we asked. We were advised multiple times that if you make the survey too long, no one's going to answer it. So we had to be somewhat selective in what we asked, just to make sure that we got a robust set of respondents.
Here's another question. How can Plug-in America dissuade people from buying new ICE vehicles? It's sometimes hard to get them to buy an EV, but if we can persuade them to at least not buy a new ICE, then we solve the problem of millions of new ICE being manufactured.
We do weigh in on policies that set longer term goals, phasing out internal combustion engines by 2030 or 2035. But we really can't be saying right now, don't buy a gasoline car, and particularly because EVs are not yet cost competitive with the lowest price cars like a Corolla or a Honda Civic. I mean, when we have EVs in that ballpark, it'd be a lot easier to make that case. Right now, it's pretty hard to say you should buy a Bolt and not a Honda Civic when there's a $12,000 difference in price.
Yeah, also, I would say that we found that the messaging is really important, that to tell people not to do something is kind of a more difficult messaging in the world, and that what we believe is that EVs sell themselves because they're a better technology. And so it's saying you should buy an EV because they're awesome. They're convenient, they're less expensive, they're fun to drive, they've got environmental benefits, there's all these things. That's more of a compelling message than saying you should not buy a gas car. And so, and particularly because EVs still don't fit every sort of niche in the market. So pickup trucks, for example, if you drive a pickup truck right now, there's not a lot of good choices for EVs. That's changing. In a year from now, we'll have that conversation and there's going to be a whole selection of pickup trucks. But I think part of our challenge is that we need to get EVs, you know, people drive a variety of different vehicles. They have a variety of different needs. And we need to have EVs that meet all those different needs. And then I think they'll really start to dominate the market. And that's, you know, that's happening, but it's taking a little while.
We also have a couple questions about kind of the breakdown of the data from rural areas and also kind of by states or regions. Was there more interest in certain areas of the country or any sort of differences between like urban versus rural or anything you can say about that?
California was not represented proportional to its EV population. In fact, there were maybe a quarter to a third of the respondents in California when it has about half the EVs. So we're actually pretty well on geographic diversity. And in terms of rural, I mean, we can go to the zip code data and try to figure that out, but we didn't have questions that would easily parse that out for us.
There are also a couple of questions here about kind of the methodology and then also the report and such. So somebody asked who was sent the survey. I think we briefly touched on this at the beginning, but we primarily distributed the survey both to Plug-in America, our Plug-in America supporters, our mailing list. We have many thousands and thousands and thousands of EV drivers in our network. And that was sort of the first place, but we also knew that there could be some bias or that could skew. And so we also did a lot of social media ads on Facebook and Instagram, looking for other electric vehicle drivers, other EV consumers who may not be part of Plug-in America's network and get them to fill out the survey. And we did offer a $500 incentive as a way to sort of encourage people to participate in the survey. So that was definitely advertised. So that was our way to, you know, we really did focus this on electric vehicle consumers, not sort of the general public about, you know, this wasn't a survey of the general public's perception of EVs. We really wanted to hear from the drivers and intenders themselves. So, so that's how we did that. And then there are also a couple of questions here about the report and the slides. There is a report that's, oh, sorry.
And among those two pools, the answers were pretty much the same. So we were worried that there was going to be a bias that, you know, Plug-in America members would have a different perspective than the rest of the world. But in fact, the people who were just responding to a banner ad on EV on social media actually had really similar responses to our network. So that was good, actually.
Yes. So there are also a couple of questions here about the survey results and the report and the slides. There is a report on our website. I can drop a link in the chat to the report that was sent out a couple of weeks ago. And then we will also make a recording of this webinar and the slides available. So I am, just a second. Okay, so I just dropped a link to the report in the chat, and then yes, like I said, we will send out the slides and the recording to everybody who is registered. Let's see, other questions.
I just want to take this one here. There's a comment more than a question about someone's been to an Audi dealership and a Ford dealership for the e-tron and the Mustang Mach-E, and they thought no knowledge, you know, it's pretty common there was no knowledge of the vehicles. And, you know, we're really hopeful that Ford can make a big splash with these electric vehicles, but there is a need for knowledge, not only of the vehicle itself, but of incentives and policies. And that's often where the dealership knowledge is lacking. They can talk about that car possibly, but not necessarily about rebates or utility bills or things outside of their wheelhouse. So that's one of the areas where our PlugStar training really provides benefits, and whenever we'd love to work with Audi and Ford dealerships all over the country where we have programs.
We also have a question. Are you talking to state legislators and utilities? In Virginia, we don't have support from either. I don't know, Pete, if you want to talk very briefly about kind of what our advocacy efforts.
Sure. We are not lobbyists, so there's certain things we can do and can't do. We can do public information. We can do ride-and drives. We can do a lot of other things. We can do public hearings and processes. And Virginia is involved in the NESCOM effort, Northeast States for Coordinated Air Use Management, which has been doing some stuff on EVs. They're starting the rulemaking to join the ZEV, Zero Emission Vehicle Program. So I think you might see some movement in Virginia. And as the utilities, the Utility Commission, we try to encourage them to approve utility transportation electrification projects. Utilities can stand to benefit from EVs by making better use of their assets, lowering rates for everybody. If they are not decoupled, they actually benefit from selling more electricity. So EVs are really a win for utilities in most cases. So I think that's a good opportunity to stay involved, and I think you will see some progress in Virginia over the next year. As to be involved with their legislators, the state legislators, I will look for opportunities to do so. I do some of the Mid-Atlantic as well as the Northeast.
Another question. Hello, thanks for the talk. 15% of salespeople are very knowledgeable. What is the area of expertise that potential EV buyers are let down by? Having more understanding on where dealers are deficient could help us supplement and market.
So as Pete said, what we found from our own dealer program is that dealers are generally pretty skilled at talking about the vehicle. So the features of the vehicle, the specs, what it will do. Where salespeople are weaker is the broader EV environment. So talking about incentives, talking about charging, what are your different options with charging, talking about the kind of EV lifestyle. So depending on where you live and how you charge and how far you drive and how much you go on road trips, what's a good EV for you, if it's a good fit or not. So those are the kind of the ecosystem outside of the sheet metal is where dealers don't do as well. So if you have some knowledge of that going into a dealership, you'll be in much better shape. In terms of talking about the vehicles, they're usually pretty well trained in talking about the features of the vehicle.
I'll add that from my knowledge, there's often one EV expert who knows the EV car inside and out, and that person isn't available, they're busy, they're out sick, or if they just leave because there's a lot of turnover at dealerships, then you can start again and train someone else up into EV information. Yeah,
so actually a really good tip if you're thinking about buying an EV, call the dealership in advance, tell them you're interested in their electric vehicle and say, can I make an appointment? Do you have a specialist here who focuses on this? And then hopefully they will, and then you'll have a much better experience, because if there's only one person on staff who's good at selling the EV and that person is at lunch when you get there or not available, you'll have a much worse experience. But if you schedule an appointment with them, then that'll hopefully be much better.
So another question, understanding that charging and the availability of charging is a significant barrier, what is the perception of intenders of the charging availability? In other words, do they feel confident in their ability to locate?
So that information, I think we do have in the full database, which is enormous, of the concerns that intenders had why they might not buy an EV. And we can look that up. I can tell you from those who did have EVs, sometimes they decided finding the station was challenging, even with the apps, once you're in a parking garage or a large parking lot and the app is imprecise. So those who have EVs know there's lots of chargers out there that non-EV drivers don't know about. But in some cases, the last 100 yards can be a little bit tricky, especially in parking garages and the like.
So that's a signage question. So we didn't really focus on that very much, but signage, anecdotally, we know is a big issue. And I've definitely had the experience of driving around a huge mall looking for the chargers they're there somewhere, but if you don't know exactly where they are and the signage is very poor, it can be a problem. So signage, that kind of ties in with availability as well.
And sort of a similar question, just regarding intender sort of understanding. For people that have issues with charging speed, do we feel confident in their understanding of their own vehicle's charging capability and their perception of the speed being inadequate? In other words, a PHEV is not typically going to charge as quickly as a BEV. Do people understand this when purchasing?
I think so. So we had about 1,900 separate comments of what their concerns were with public charging. And a few of them did say they never use it because it's too slow, but they know that ahead of time and they just don't go to those. The ones who had a bad experience with charging speed said it advertised at 50 kilowatts and only charged at 17. So it was being less than it was supposed to be capable of doing. So there were a couple from people who had PFs and said they know they can't use the fast chargers. I think that's an important point to communicate on the part of the dealers, is the charging capability. And yeah, there was certainly some of that in the survey.
Another question, does EV uptake in Norway adequately demonstrate that the vehicles are capable in cold and snow? How do we share Norway's experience?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, Norway has, I think, solves the question of whether you can drive EVs in cold weather and long winters. Clearly you can. I don't think the message has fully gotten out there. I mean, there's, they drive a little bit different selection of vehicles than here. They tend to have like the Audi e-tron, I think, is the #1 selling EV in Norway. So evidently that works well in the cold, and Teslas are really popular there as well. And you don't see as much, like shorter range vehicles are more challenging for cold weather. But yeah, I think we just need to sort of keep beating that drum and saying, listen, if you can drive an EV in Oslo in the winter, you can probably do it in Minneapolis too.
I'll add there are accommodations. We do account for that reduced charging range, the reduced range in winter, by recommending greater density of public charging in places like New Hampshire along the roads to the ski resorts and so on. Is like, we're aware of that. It can be solved. Their answer is greater density of charging infrastructure. So it's not a complete non-issue, but it is an issue that we have a solution to.
Right. And also, as batteries get larger, it's less of an issue too. If you have a battery that, can go 300 miles and you get 20% degradation, yeah, it's not a big deal. If you have a 2015 Nissan Leaf, like I do, and it degrades 20%, that could be more of a problem.
Another question that we got says, this might be a bit too specific, but do you have any recommendations for hosting ride-and drives? I work for an EV charging station company. We're trying to organize our first event for later this year once hopefully COVID is different. One thing that I will say is just put in a plug for our Drive Electric Earth Day and National Drive Electric Week events. If you're not familiar with those, they are national campaigns that we do in April for DEED and September for NDO, National Drive Electric Week. And each of those campaigns host hundreds of events around the country that include test drives and EV showcases, and just they're great opportunities for people who are new to EVs to come and check them out. So if you are thinking of hosting a ride and drive, I would definitely recommend doing it as part of either Drive Electric Earth Day or National Drive Electric Week. And there are links to both of those on our homepage, because with each of those campaigns, we provide a lot of resources that help you make those events possible. So that would be my recommendation for that. Another question that we got, this lack of dealer enthusiasm has been and continues to be rampant. Does it mean more pressure on the manufacturers, or do those manufacturers remain not fully on board despite their talk of commitment to EVs? Are they still hedging their bets to continue to profit not only from sales, but their costly maintenance, which, as we know, EVs don't need?
Dealer enthusiasm, I would say that dealers get more excited when they have supply of vehicles. It's hard to get them excited if they don't have a lot of vehicles, and when they feel like they can sell them at a profit, you know. So and you know, dealers are businesses. So I think that as dealers, we've seen dealers who have a good supply and they're in areas where there's demand, they learn how to sell them and they learn how to do it profitably. So it is not an insurmountable problem. It is not something that, you know, dealers are fundamentally hostile to EVs. It's just that, you know, they've got a business. It's kind of a volume business where at a dealership, salespeople, they need to move a lot of cars to you know, make their paycheck for the month. And so as they get more volume and they get better at selling it, and certainly dealers who sell more cars are better at selling them. That won't shock you because they learn how to, salespeople learn how to do it. You know, it's a solvable problem, but it's a question of sort of throughput. So
I will add, we are also involved in direct sales efforts to enable companies such as Rivian, not only Tesla, but also Rivian and Lucid and some of the others to sell directly to consumers. And if dealerships are, you know, providing a service and adding value, they'll be able to compete. And if not, we may see Rivian, you know, gaining market share the way Tesla did in the truck space.
yeah, certainly the driver experience problem is not really a concern with places like Tesla, where that's all the salespeople do, is they only sell electric cars, and so they're good at it. And I would expect with other pure EV manufacturers, as they come to the market, you'll see that as well. But also, you know, there's some dealerships that sell a huge number of EVs, selected dealerships. And you go to those dealerships, the salespeople will be good at selling EVs because that's what they do all day. So it's solvable.
Another question, and thanks for all of the questions. This is great. To lease or buy, do you have any research on this?
I don't think we asked it. Again, love to ask a lot more questions, but logistics limits us. But that probably is an interesting point. In particular, I was hearing a push for encouraging the leasing model to generate a used EV market faster, to enlarge the used EV market by encouraging leases, and then you'd have a lot of 3-year-old cars available for sale.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's a lot of sort of personal things that you need to think through in the decision to lease or buy. Is this a car that you think you're going to own for a long time? You know, or you do want to own this car for the next 15 years? And there's EVs out there that'll last that long. Can you get the tax credit? So in some cases, if your federal tax liability is low, you can get the tax credit by leasing and not by buying it. So that could be, in some cases, that's a benefit. Do you like to always drive a new car? You know, do you want to have a new car every 3 years? So there's a lot of sort of personal issues. Certainly, in general, in the world, leasing is more expensive than buying. Because you're always buying it. You always have a new car, but there's a lot of personal preferences involved with that decision.
Okay, another question. I heard that a bunch of chargers are going to be installed on the New Jersey Turnpike. How can we get more of this done?
I'll tell you, I know there were already a bunch a year and a half ago when I was doing a road trip, and they're putting in more through recent legislation. And we were involved with that through one of our coalitions. There's also the Volkswagen settlement funding has supported infrastructure in a lot of states. We're hopeful that a federal bill will support more. We support utility programs to do some of the make-ready work for this. So there's a lot of areas in which we support this infrastructure investment. But as we see from the survey, it's really important to have qualifiers like reliability standards and redundancy and interoperability and accessible payment systems and things like that to avoid the problems that are so common in these public charging networks.
Great. Another question here. Do you have any support or resources for utilities that can be shared with their customers?
Yeah, absolutely. We work with a lot of utilities on strengthening their outreach and education programs. It's probably a longer discussion than we can have here, but shoot us an email and we would be happy to talk. We have a bunch of resources utilities can.
I see one here I'd like to answer. At a minimum, dealerships should stop locking their chargers with gas cars. That was something that cropped up a few times in complaints. The one charger's at a dealership, and you get there and it's blocked by their own gas cars, and you have to beg them to move the cars out of the way. So iced at the dealership is an unpleasant experience.
Yes, and they should make sure that all their EVs are charged. I've had the experience of going to a dealership and none of the EVs have any charge. So good tip.
Here's another question. Would it be possible to post on the Plug in America website, for example, a directory of known, proven, EV-friendly, and knowledgeable dealers across the country?
So in fact, we have that. So if you go to the plugstar.com website, it takes you through the whole process of buying an EV. It asks you a bunch of different questions about your lifestyle and where you live and how far you drive and things like that. And then it recommends a few different EVs that would be a good fit for you. And then once you settle on a car that you're interested in and you give it your zip code, it'll show you dealers near you that sell that car. And the ones that are PlugStar certified, that is the ones that have gone through our training program, they'll float to the top of the list and it'll say PlugStar certified on there. So you could do that. We don't have them in every state in the country yet, but it's growing. And if you're in an area where there are PlugStar dealers, you'll see that when you look for a particular model and you type in your zip code.
And another question, any thoughts that you will have lobbyists in the future?
Well, we are a 501c3, and so under federal law, to keep our tax status, we have to do very limited amount of lobbying. So we see our focus in the world is primarily around educating. So we educate the public, we educate policymakers and legislators and people like that. So we try to inform people about EVs. Doing like hardcore lobbying is it's a little bit different than kind of our model now of how we work.
There is a new coalition of lobbyists for the zero emission vehicle manufacturers. ZETA, I think it's called, the Zero Emission Transportation Association. So it's a new lobbying group that's set up by, I think, Tesla and Rivian and Lucid and so on.
We have a couple of questions regarding specific manufacturers. So I'll throw out both of these and see if you guys have any thoughts. One is, why do you think BMW and Mercedes are reluctant in the US market with regards to their recent statements? And the other question is, thoughts on the rumors that Hyundai will sell you the car but lease the battery pack? Any thoughts on those?
Why are BMW and Mercedes reluctant? I don't know. They both have had vehicles in the market. They're a little bit behind the curve right now, I think, in terms of catching up with some of the other vehicles that are coming out. You know, they both put out really great cars in general, so I'm hoping they catch up. I don't know why they are where they are right now. And then in terms of Hyundai leasing you a battery, I don't know anything about that. I don't know, Pete or Eric, anybody?
I hadn't heard about that. I can look into it, but I hadn't heard about it.
Another question, as an owner of a 2012 and 2013 Nissan Leaf, one huge problem I have experienced is the lack of affordable replacement battery options. As all of the new entrants hit the market, I think that is not on the minds of new EV purchasers, but it will be someday for sure. The entire EV life cycle should include readily affordable replacements to greater enhance the usefulness of these vehicles. Are there any known providers for EV replacement batteries in the US?
I don't know that. I will say thank you for being one of those early adopters. We would not have the EV market if not for those who bought the 2012 Leaf and so on. But yeah, that was a vehicle with a more problematic battery, as we know. I understand they've improved quite a bit, as has GM. Hopefully we won't need as many replacement batteries for the newer EVs, but we'll still need some. So I don't know about who currently provides those. I'm surprised Nissan doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is that, you know, as you're probably painfully aware, older Leaf batteries do deteriorate faster than pretty much all other EVs in the market. And so that's a particular challenge with 2012, 13, 14 Leafs that most other EVs don't have so much. I think the focus of most manufacturers these days is to make the batteries really robust so that people don't need to change them out. So for example, pretty much all other manufacturers have thermal management on their batteries, which does a lot to preserve the life of them. Older, you know, Leafs don't. Although Nissan is now moving that direction with the new Aria, they're going to have thermal management. So I think that that's the direction manufacturers prefer to go is to have a more robust battery that lasts a long time. So that's sort of a challenge that's unique to older Leafs. I have one also, so that's something that I'm aware of. It would be great if there was a replacement battery, but I think that's, you know, for the manufacturers, the batteries are so expensive relative to the value of a used car that that's, I think, not something that they're really focused on so much.
Well, it's now 11:59 Pacific, so it's probably time for us to wrap it up. Thanks so much for all of your great questions. This has been really fantastic. I don't know if any of you guys have any last thoughts before we go?
I just want to thank all the attendees. I have to say this was really fun and interesting to have this dialogue with everybody. And the questions were great. Obviously, they just scanned the whole universe of EV questions, but it was really fun and you know, pretty thoughtful questions. I enjoyed this a lot.
I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. There's a lot, and some of them are really good. I'm sorry we didn't have time to get to everything.
Well, thank you, everybody. Like I said, a recording of this will be made available, as well as the slides. We'll send that out probably later today or tomorrow, so you can look for that in your email. And thanks so much, everybody.